You didn't suddenly feel this today. It's been building quietly in the background, in moments you usually ignore. The hesitation before you speak, the way your thoughts are clear in your head, but come out slightly adjusted, the way you almost say something real, and then decide not to. At first, it didn't feel like a problem. It felt like control. You told yourself you were being aware, choosing your timing, avoiding unnecessary friction. And that explanation made sense for a long time. It gave you stability, a sense that you understood how to move through people without creating tension. But now, that same behavior feels different. You notice it. Not just what you're doing, but when you're doing it. The exact moment you stop yourself. The exact point where your expression shifts from natural to controlled. And once you see that clearly, it becomes hard to ignore. Because now, it doesn't feel like control, it feels like interruption. You still know what you think. You still feel things clearly. That part of you never disappeared. It never left you, it never weakened, it never stopped existing. It's still there, intact, observing everything, understanding more than you usually express. The clarity is still present. The awareness is still active. The instincts you once trusted so naturally are still operating beneath the surface, quietly guiding you even when you don't act on them. But what changed is how you express it. Not what you think, not what you feel, not what you understand, just how much of it you allow to come out. Over time, almost without realizing it, you became selective. You learned how much of yourself to reveal depending on where you are, who you're with, and what the situation demands. You started measuring your responses, filtering your thoughts, adjusting your reactions before they even fully formed. You learned to read the room. You learned when to speak, and more importantly, when to stay quiet. You learned how to soften your opinions just enough so they don't create friction. How to hold back certain thoughts because they might not be received well. How to present a version of yourself that feels acceptable, understandable, easy to engage with. Enough to stay included, but not enough to fully expose your perspective. And it didn't feel wrong. It didn't feel like you were being fake. It felt intelligent. It felt controlled. It felt like maturity. Because in many ways it was adaptive. You were responding to your environment, learning from past experiences, noticing what worked, what didn't, what created connection, and what created resistance. You were refining yourself in real time, shaping your behavior to move through situations more smoothly. And for a while, it worked. You avoided unnecessary conflict. You kept relationships stable. You maintained a certain level of acceptance in different environments. Things felt easier, more manageable, more predictable. You weren't misunderstood as often. You weren't challenged as much. You weren't forced to defend yourself constantly. And that felt like progress. But adaptation has a hidden cost. A cost that doesn't show up immediately. At first it feels like control, like improvement, like you're becoming more aware, more socially intelligent, more refined. But slowly, something else starts happening underneath. The more you adjust yourself to fit situations, the further you begin to move away from your natural state. Not dramatically, not in a way that's obvious at first, but gradually, in small, unnoticed shifts. You start choosing the safer response instead of the honest one. You start holding back thoughts that once came out naturally. You start prioritizing comfort over authenticity. And because these changes are subtle, they don't feel like changes. They feel normal. They feel like the new version of you. And that's where it becomes deeper. Because if that adjustment continues long enough, it stops feeling like something you're doing consciously. It stops feeling like a choice you're making in certain situations. It becomes your default. You no longer think, should I say this? You automatically don't say it. You no longer think, maybe I should express this differently. You automatically filter it. You no longer feel like you're adjusting yourself. You feel like this is you. And that's the shift. That quiet, almost invisible shift. From intentional behavior to automatic limitation. Where what started as awareness turns into restriction. Where what started as adaptation slowly becomes suppression. And the most dangerous part is, you don't notice it happening. Because nothing breaks. Nothing collapses. Everything continues to function. Your life still moves forward. Your conversations still happen. Your relationships still exist. But something changes in the quality of your presence. You start feeling slightly disconnected in moments where you should feel fully engaged. You start noticing a gap between what you think and what you say. A small hesitation before expressing something real. A subtle pause where your natural response used to be immediate. And over time, that gap grows. Not because you lost your voice, but because you stopped using it fully. Think about it. There were moments before where you spoke without overthinking, where your thoughts came out clearly, directly, without layers of filtering, where your reactions were immediate and real. And people felt that, not because it was perfect, but because it was authentic. Now, that same clarity still exists inside you. But it has to pass through layers first. Layers of consideration. Layers of self-checking. Layers of adjustment. Is this the right time? Will this be understood? Should I say this differently? And by the time your thought reaches the surface, it's no longer exactly what it was. It's a refined version, a safer version, a smaller version. And again, it doesn't feel wrong. It feels controlled. But control, when overused, starts to limit expression. And limited expression starts to reshape identity. Because the more you operate from that filtered version of yourself, the more that version becomes familiar, comfortable, normal. Until one day, you realize something subtle but important. You don't express yourself the way you used to. Not because you can't, but because you've trained yourself not to. And that realization doesn't come as a big moment. It shows up quietly. In conversations where you hold back more than you want to. In situations where you feel like you're not fully there. In moments where you think something clearly, but choose not to say it. And slowly, you start feeling that internal tension. That quiet awareness that something is slightly off. Not externally, internally. Because deep down, you still know what you think. You still feel things clearly. That part of you never disappeared. It's just been managed, controlled, adjusted, and over time, that management became your default way of existing. And once something becomes default, it runs automatically, without effort, without awareness, without questioning. And that's where the real shift happens. Not when you choose to hold back, but when holding back becomes your natural response. Because at that point, you're no longer adapting to situations. You're operating within a limitation that feels like your identity. And the difference between those two changes everything. Nothing major changed around you, no obvious trigger, no big external shift. Nothing dramatic happened that you can point to and say, that's when everything started changing. Your environment stayed the same. The same routines, the same people, the same conversations, the same patterns repeating in familiar ways. From the outside, everything still looks normal, still stable, still predictable. But internally, something sharpened. Not suddenly, not in a loud or overwhelming way, but quietly, precisely. Almost like a lens inside you adjusted without asking for permission. The same situations are happening, but you're not experiencing them the same way anymore. The same conversations take place, but now you hear more than just words. The same reactions show up, but now you notice the space before them. Your awareness moved forward. And once awareness moves forward, it doesn't ask whether you're ready for it. It just expands. You started noticing things you previously overlooked, small details that used to pass by without any attention. The pauses between your thoughts, the hesitation before you speak, the slight tightening in your chest when you hold something back. The way you begin to say something and then adjust it before it fully comes out. You notice how your mind scans situations faster than before, predicting reactions, calculating responses, shaping your expression before it even leaves you. And what used to feel natural now feels observed. What used to happen automatically now feels visible. You start catching yourself in real time, mid-conversation, mid-thought, mid-reaction. You notice the exact moment where your natural response gets interrupted, the exact point where you pull back just slightly before fully expressing what you actually think or feel. And it's subtle. That's what makes it powerful. Not dramatic enough to disrupt everything, but clear enough that you can't ignore it anymore. And once something becomes visible, you can't go back to not seeing it. That's the part that changes everything. Because before this, everything operated in the background. Your responses, your filters, your adjustments, they were happening automatically. You didn't question them, you didn't analyze them, you just moved through situations the way you had learned to move. But now, there's a layer of awareness sitting on top of it. Watching. Not judging, just noticing. And that noticing creates space. Space between what you feel and what you express. Space between your first instinct and your final response. Space between your natural reaction and your adjusted behavior. And in that space, something becomes clear. You begin to see patterns. Not once, not twice, but consistently. You see how often you soften your thoughts before speaking. How often you reduce your intensity to match the environment. How often you choose the safer version of what you want to say instead of the real one. You notice how quickly you adapt, how easily you shift yourself depending on the situation, and how automatic that shift has become over time. And this is where the discomfort begins. Not because something is wrong, but because something is now clear. Before, it was automatic. Now, it's conscious. And there's a difference between those two that you can't ignore once you feel it. Automatic behavior feels effortless. It doesn't question itself. It doesn't pause. It just happens. But conscious awareness introduces friction. Not external friction, internal. You start feeling the moment where you could respond differently. The moment where you could say what you actually think. The moment where you could choose not to filter yourself. And even if you don't act on it, you feel it, that slight tension, that quiet pull, that awareness that there was another option, and you didn't take it. And that awareness doesn't disappear. It stays. It follows you into the next conversation, the next situation, the next moment where you find yourself doing the same thing again. And slowly, that pattern becomes undeniable. You can't pretend it's not happening. You can't convince yourself it's random. Because now you've seen it clearly, repeatedly, consistently. And clarity changes the experience. Before you were inside the pattern. Now you're observing it. And once you observe something, you separate from it, even if just slightly. That separation is subtle but powerful, because it creates the possibility of change. Not forced change, not immediate transformation, but the possibility of doing something differently the next time it happens. And that's where things stop being passive, because conscious patterns don't stay the same. They can't. Once something becomes conscious, it either evolves or it creates tension. Because awareness doesn't allow repetition to feel comfortable anymore. What once felt normal now feels slightly off. What once felt natural now feels slightly controlled. What once felt effortless now feels slightly deliberate. And that slightly is enough. Enough to make you pause. Enough to make you question. Enough to make you realize that you're no longer moving through your life the same way you were before. And that's the real shift. Not in your environment, not in your circumstances, but in how you experience yourself within them. Because now, you're not just reacting, you're aware of how you react. And that awareness doesn't go backwards. It's easy to assume this is about confidence. It's not. Confidence is surface level. It's the visible layer, the part people talk about, measure, and try to fix directly. It shows up in how you speak, how you carry yourself, how certain or uncertain you appear in front of others. But what you're experiencing right now goes deeper than that. It's not just about how you present yourself, it's about how aligned you are with yourself internally. This is about alignment. There's a version of you that exists very clearly in your awareness. A version that knows exactly how you could show up. Direct, clear, present. Not overthinking every word, not adjusting every reaction, not holding back what feels natural to express. This version doesn't hesitate in the same way. It doesn't need to calculate as much. It simply responds, because it trusts what it knows and how it feels. And then there's the version you've been operating from. The one that filters before speaking. The one that adjusts depending on the situation. The one that slightly reduces intensity, slightly reshapes expression, slightly holds back just enough to stay comfortable within the environment. It's controlled, measured, aware, but also limited. For a long time, these two versions coexisted without conflict, because you weren't fully aware of the difference between them. The gap was there, but it wasn't visible enough to create tension. You could move through situations, adjust when needed, and not question it too deeply. It felt like part of how things worked. But now, that gap is clear. Once it's clear, it doesn't stay neutral. Those two versions no longer match. The version you know you can be and the version you've been expressing are no longer aligned in the same way. One has moved forward, while the other is still operating from older patterns. One feels more natural, more accurate, more complete, while the other feels slightly restricted, slightly outdated. And when they don't match, you feel tension. Not fear, tension. Because fear would tell you to stop. Fear would push you away from change, make you retreat, make you avoid. But this isn't that. This doesn't feel like something pulling you back. It feels like something pulling you forward, while something else is still holding you in place. That's tension. It's the feeling of two directions existing at the same time. Part of you is ready to move differently, to speak more directly, to act more honestly, to express without unnecessary filtering. It's not trying to force anything, it just knows. It recognizes what feels aligned now. But another part of you is still repeating what it has learned before. The familiar patterns, the automatic adjustments, the controlled responses that once helped you navigate situations more smoothly. And those patterns aren't wrong. They're just no longer fully aligned with where you are now. That's why it feels uncomfortable in a very specific way. Not overwhelming, not chaotic, but persistent. Like a quiet pressure that doesn't go away. A constant awareness that something could be expressed differently, handled differently, lived differently. You notice it in small moments. When you're about to say something and pause for a second longer than you want to. When you adjust your tone slightly, even though your natural tone felt right. When you hold back a thought, not because it's wrong, but because it might not fit the situation perfectly. And in those moments, the tension becomes visible, because you can feel both versions at the same time. The one that would naturally move forward, and the one that holds back out of habit. And that's where the shift is happening. Not in your confidence, but in your alignment. Right now, there's a subtle shift happening that makes this more noticeable. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but precise. Almost like something inside you has adjusted just enough to bring certain things into focus. You're not experiencing something completely new. You're experiencing something more clearly. The moon is moving through Leo, and Leo energy doesn't force anything new into your life. It doesn't suddenly create problems or insert unfamiliar situations. Instead, it does something quieter but more revealing. It shows you what's already there. It brings attention to what you've been avoiding within your current reality. It highlights expression, presence, and the way you show up when there's even a slight sense of attention, visibility, or emotional exposure. Leo energy is not about changing who you are. It's about showing you how much of yourself you're actually allowing to be seen. So if you've been holding back, you feel it more. Not in a loud, overwhelming way, but in small, specific moments. When you're about to speak and hesitate slightly. When you feel something clearly, but don't fully express it. When you become aware of how much you're adjusting yourself depending on who's around you. And that awareness doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from attention being directed inward. Because Leo doesn't just represent external attention. It reflects internal presence. It asks a simple but uncomfortable question. Are you fully showing up as yourself, or are you presenting a version that feels safer? And when that question becomes active, even subtly, you start noticing the difference. Not because something new is happening, because something hidden is becoming visible. It's like a light turning on in a familiar space. Nothing changed in the room. The furniture is in the same place, the structure is the same, everything is exactly where it was before. But now, you can see it, clearly, fully, without shadows hiding the details. And that clarity changes your experience of the space. Suddenly, you notice things you didn't pay attention to before. Corners you ignored, details you overlooked, areas that didn't seem important until they became visible. That's exactly what's happening internally. The patterns were always there. The hesitation, the filtering, the subtle holding back, none of it is new. But now, it's illuminated. Now it's in your awareness in a way that doesn't allow you to overlook it. And once you see it like that, you can't unsee it. That's why it feels different. Not heavier, not more complicated, just clearer. And clarity doesn't let you stay comfortable in the same patterns. Because comfort depends on not fully seeing. It depends on partial awareness. On moving through things without questioning them too deeply. But once clarity enters, that comfort starts to shift. What once felt normal now feels slightly off. What once felt automatic now feels slightly controlled. What once felt natural now feels slightly limited. And that slightly is enough to create change. Not forced change. Not immediate transformation. But a steady, undeniable awareness that something in the way you're showing up can't stay exactly the same anymore. You don't actually fear attention. If you look closely, that's not where the hesitation comes from. You fear what happens after. Because once you express something real, you can't control how it's received. You can't manage people's reactions. You can't take it back or soften it after the fact. And that removes control. That's where hesitation lives. Not in insecurity, in control. You've been managing how much of yourself is visible, keeping it within a range that feels safe and predictable. But now, that range feels limiting. This feeling can easily be misunderstood. It feels intense, unfamiliar, slightly uncomfortable. So your mind labels it as fear, but if you actually observe it, it doesn't behave like fear. Fear tells you to stop. This feeling doesn't. This feeling says you can't stay like this anymore. That's not fear. That's readiness. It doesn't feel calm, because readiness often comes with friction. It creates a sense that something needs to shift, even if you haven't fully figured out how yet. And that's exactly where you are. This pattern didn't appear randomly. It was built over time. Every time you held back something real, you reinforced it. Every time you chose comfort over expression, you strengthened that behavior. And eventually, it became automatic. Not fake, just reduced. And now, that reduced version doesn't fit anymore, because your awareness has outgrown it. This isn't about becoming someone new. There's no dramatic transformation waiting for you. The shift is simple. Instead of holding back, you allow slightly more. Instead of filtering everything, you let one honest thought come through. Not perfectly, not all at once, just honestly. And that's enough. Because the moment you stop reducing yourself, even slightly, something changes internally. You stop feeling invisible, not because others suddenly see you differently, but because you're no longer hiding from yourself. And once that happens, going back doesn't feel safe anymore. It feels limiting.